Hey everybody, Birdie here, and I'm going to tell you the secret history of the Grey ETs. Now, everybody I think out there has heard of the little gray aliens, little gray extraterrestrials perhaps, which are little 4 foot tall, skinny, gray beings that purportedly come out of spaceships and they abduct people. People report being abducted. Many, many tens of thousands of people have reported this. And it's something that's always intrigued me. What's going on here? Is this a real phenomenon? Is this a mass psychosis? I've had my own sightings, my own experiences, and I wanted to understand those a little better as well. So I embarked on this project. Now, this project took me 8 years, and it's not entirely complete at this point, but I've gathered a lot of data. I started by looking at a classic abduction case, which I'll show you shortly, and that spurred some questions in my mind. What are these beings? Where did they come from? What are they doing? Why are they even on this planet? I wanted to answer those questions, so I wrote a series of tasks. A task is a question that you're going to answer using remote viewing, in my case, TransDimensional Mapping, which is a form of remote viewing that I've been developing over the past 25 years. I've been in remote viewing for 30 years. And so these tasks, I came up with roughly 300 of them, looking at all different potential aspects of this phenomenon. I tried to write the tasks in very non-leading ways. I'm not going to get into the specifics of that because I just want to get into the story for the purposes of this program. But I am writing a book on this entire project, which will cover every single task and every single map that I completed. I've completed over 1,200 maps, roughly 250 sessions. Each of my sessions has a minimum of 4 maps and sometimes up to 8 or 9 or 10. And so all of these maps tell a story. They tell a super interesting story. Now, these sessions weren't done what's called front-loaded, meaning I didn't know what I was looking at. They were done blind, and in fact, they were done double-blind because they were put into a huge pool of experiences, a pool of targets in traditional remote viewing language. And this pool had over 8,000 different things. Most things are very mundane. Things like photographs of whales or dolphins or the Taj Mahal or a pie eating contest somewhere, or some written tasks on famous events throughout history. But I threw in these 300 things into the big pile of 8,000, and they came up at random, which is why this project has lasted 8 years to date. And so every time I would get a little piece of the puzzle. And what I'm going to share with you in this program isn't the entire project, because that would take many, many, many hours or even days to go through. But I'm going to share just a handful of maps to show you just what's possible with transdimensional mapping, what you can figure out about questions that seem to be intractable. And some of the data that I got mimics some of the reports of experiencers out there, reports of witnesses, and some of the data is entirely new, out of left field. Where did that come from? But as I always say, you get what you get. So I hope you enjoy. Here we go. Let's start. Okay, transdimensional mapping, my form of remote viewing, the secret history of the Grey ETs. So here's how I started this project. I didn't have the project in mind, and I had a task to look at the Betty and Barney Hill experience. This happened in September of 1961, and Betty and Barney Hill were a married couple living in New Hampshire. They were driving along the back roads of New Hampshire at nighttime, and they underwent what came to be known as a very famous abduction case. Their car was stalled on the road. A huge dish-shaped craft appeared over them, And they had an incredible series of experiences, including hours of missing time. They woke later in their car way down the road and they didn't know what happened. In fact, they had no memory really of the experience until they underwent separately a hypnotic regression. And the story that came out of their regression has become one of the hallmarks of the whole abduction scenario, where you're taken aboard a ship by means unknown and medical procedures are done to you by these little gray creatures, these little beings. And these medical procedures are scary, they can be painful, and they also seem to involve the human reproductive system for the most part. There seems to be a focus on that area. Now, when I first looked at the Betty and Barney Hill experience, I wasn't expecting it. This was just a homework session that I did. And let me show you what I got. Okay, so here's one of my maps from this particular session. And again, this was blind. I didn't know what it was going to be. For all I knew, it was going to be a politician giving a speech or the Leaning Tower of Pisa. It could have been anything, anywhere. But what did I get? I got a big flippin' UFO in the sky. Look at this. Here's our big UFO. And the big UFO had these windows, and there were beings looking out the windows. And this ended up being what Betty and Barney Hill reported, interestingly enough. And I said that they were looking down. And what were they looking down at? A vehicle, a car on the road, Betty and Barney Hill's car. And I said that there were two people inside and the car had stalled out. I said that it was an old car, vintage, because looking at it today, that would be a vintage car. Of course, then it would have been a car of its time, but it was a vintage car from my perspective in this day and age. I said that it was very green here and outdoor, and there were mountains around. I said that it was in the northeast of the United States of America, which is where they lived. And I got, when I first started the session, this was the beginning of the session, this was my first map in the session, I got that there were beings, it was cold, open, outdoor, something was massive and hidden and secret. There was time involvement. It was northern in the mountains, green and lush. It was quiet, nighttime. And look, I drew these little red lights on each side of the craft. This was something that I believe Barney Hill discussed in his account of this. And it was rotating, it was flat, there were beings inside. Not human beings, feels alien. They were looking downward. And look at this energy coming out of the ship. I drew it in different colors because this energy was chaotic and strange, and it made me feel uncomfortable. And I said that the circular object, it was tracking the car, watching. The car was as of yet unaware, on the road. And I did a timeline. This is one of many techniques you can use in any form of remote viewing, where you just draw a timeline and you move your pen along until it feels right to stop. And I got that this happened about 50 years ago, which is pretty much on the money. And I ended up writing classic abduction case. Now, in transdimensional mapping, when you get something that's that specific, in other forms of remote viewing, that may be called an analytic overlay or a deduction, and you're supposed to discard that. You're not supposed to work with that kind of data. But in transdimensional mapping, you work with that data and you figure out why. Why did my mind say that this is a classic abduction case? So I write down why. And I figured out why my mind told me this, because there was an airborne craft, people in the craft, a sense of impending terror, and it feels like I know this one. And then I wrote down Betty and Barney Hill. And again, I asked myself, why? Why did I think that this was Betty and Barney Hill? Because the cold temperatures, the mountains, the north, and it was lush out. So this was one of several maps I did on Betty and Barney Hill. And it showed me that this was a real event. This felt real to me. This wasn't a myth or a dream or an idea or a screen memory. When you get something that's mythological, for example, if someone were to give me Santa Claus to map out to remote view, I would absolutely get a fat, jolly man in a red hat with funny deer with big, long antlers and presents and the idea of gifting. I would get all those kinds of things, but I would also get that it was a myth, that it was a story that we tell to children. It's very easy to discern what is actually physically real or there and what is something else. And to me, this felt physical and real. So it intrigued me. And this was the beginning of the journey of this whole project. So let's look at the next map. And these aren't in any particular order. I'm just sharing a handful of maps here so that you can see how all this gets put together and how you can start developing a real story that tells you something interesting about an event or a people or these beings in this case. Most of the project didn't focus on the abduction part of this scenario. I'm going to touch on that at the end. And I do have a ton more data on that, an absolute ton, but that is going to make up several huge chapters in this book that I'm writing on this whole project. I mainly want to share some of the maps that tell you who these beings are. To me, that's the most interesting aspect of all of this. I don't care about the nuts and bolts so much. I don't care about the craft. Yeah, it's interesting. And I have done many sessions, including technology transfer style sessions, using very specific techniques that I developed where you can literally draw out blueprints or architectural drawings or schematics, looking at how these craft actually operate, what's going on inside these things. Super fascinating stuff, but that's not as interesting to me as the people themselves. I don't like to call them aliens or ETs so much. I just call them people because to me, they're like you and I. They have their own thoughts, their own ideas. Maybe they're part of a hive mind in some cases. Some are not. And I want to treat them with respect, even though I'm just doing this as a consciousness project. I want to treat them with respect. So let's look at the next map. Okay. So one of the sessions that I did was I wanted to look inside the ship that Betty and Barney Hill were in, that actual ship. What's happening inside this ship? And who are these people that abducted them? Who are these people? What are they doing in there? What does their ship look like inside? What's happening? So this is a map that I got. Again, this was blind. Everything I present on No Rivets is blind. I do some front-loaded work, mostly for law enforcement, but almost everything that I map out is blind. So here's the inside of the ship, and I wrote it was inside a structure, and here are those windows here, those window-like features that Betty and Barney Hill reported. And I said that these windows were like a fluid structure. The outward can change from solid to liquid. It can move in and out, and it was opaque at times. And that was just super interesting to me. And here we're looking, it's the nighttime. Here's some little stars. Here's the moon. I even wrote moon on it. Kind of silly. Okay, so I got intrigued by these window type things. And this was the first thing I started drawing when I did this map. The rest of the map down below wasn't even developed here yet. I started with the night sky and these shapes. And I was intrigued by the shapes, and so I wanted to find out how many of them are there. How many? There were 28 of them. Now, 28 is a perfect number. And I wrote that down, and I wrote that that was important, and then I put in quotations, math is math. It's true, math is math. But to me, this just seems significant. Now, I don't know why. I could have explored that more in this particular session or in this map, and I didn't because there were so many other interesting things going on. But I have explored that later, and that will be in the book. So anyway, so here's one of the little gray dudes. And the way I drew it, now I'm a terrible artist, folks. I am very crappy as an artist, to be quite honest. This is the best I can do. And I've taken drawing classes. This is an improvement. So, you don't have to be a great artist to do good work in this sector. So here's our little, that's supposed to look like a little more like a little gray alien, although it didn't look exactly like the classic Whitley Strieber big head, big huge wraparound eyes. It was a little different. The eyes were a little more kind of sunken in, larger than a human eye, but not quite enormous, as we've seen in other accounts. And of course, there's variation in all species. Some humans have huge eyes, some humans have smaller eyes. So I'm not going to read too much into that, but that's what I drew. And it was wearing a suit. And I said that this being was smaller than me. It was not human. It was simple. It repeats one activity over and over, and it seemed very content. Now, I'm using the word it because I did a body scan on this being. Now, this little gingerbread man looking thing is called a body scan. And here on No Rivets, we do have a transdimensional mapping for diagnosis and healing class where you can learn your very own self how to do these body scans. You can integrate body scans into any kind of remote viewing session. Transdimensional mapping, of course, but you could use body scans in CRV or SRV or at HRVG, wherever you are. But here's a body scan. So I body scanned the heck out of this little guy. Here he is. I said he's stronger than he appears. His eyes see what we cannot. He had a quad-cameral brain-like organ. So we have a bicameral brain, meaning we have a right and left hemisphere. This brain, if it's a brain at all, it may not be a brain as we understand our own brains, but this organ in its head, I'll just call it a brain, but we don't know, right? Was quad-cameral, meaning it had 4 sectors to it. Very unusual. So I drew that out here. They were 3 and 1 larger one. It had 4 fingers / digits on each, at the end of each of its arm-like structures. No fingernails. No fingernails. Kind of weird. And it was wearing a suit, like a scuba suit. It was form-fitting, tight. It holds things in to protect them, and the suit is self-healing. And I said, it's not like a human nervous system. The nerves are not apparent, but there are nodes that can conduct information. So kind of similar to our nervous system, but also extraordinarily different, I did probe this being to figure out if it were male or female or something else, and I couldn't pick up any of that. And it may be that they don't have gender identity in the way that we do, or sexual dimorphism like we do. It could simply be that they do have something that would be akin to that, but that it would be classified in such a different way that my brain couldn't grasp it. When you look at stuff that's non-human, you're going to anthropomorphize it. You cannot help it. That just means you're going to put it into human language based on what you already know, that Rolodex in your mind. You're going to put it in terms that you can understand. But that may not be how they see themselves. That may not be how their reality orders itself, how they would describe their civilization, their motivations. We can't help but put our own human take on everything. I try not to do that when I map, but I am a human being, and there's always going to be a degree of that in my work. You cannot divorce the viewer from what is remote viewed. I tell every student in every class I teach that you cannot divorce yourself from this process. Every single map you do comes with your ideas about things, your expectations, your wonderings, your yearnings, your fears, your educational level, your background, how much you read, what kind of parents you had, how you grew up, what friends you keep today. All of these things add up to you, glorious, beautiful you. And you are the person having an experience when you transdimensional map. You're having an experience. And so what your maps are, it's not a pure illustration of data from the point of the gray dudes. It's my interpretation based on my experience here with the gray dudes. Hope that makes sense. So anyway, let's get back to the map. And there were these weird pod-like things, like maybe sleeping chambers or stasis pods. There were multiple, at least 10,000 of them in this ship. 10,000. And these things were metallic and biological combined. They were at rest. There was a liquid component encapsulated. This squigglies that I drew on here was an energy, plasma-like, but not plasma as I recognize it. I've looked at a lot of things involving plasma. This was plasma-like. Now, so then I asked, who is in charge here? You can ask questions when you do this work. So I asked, who is in charge here? And I got that everyone was, that it was communal, that they receive instructions and send instructions, everybody in this whole field. And they're all connected to someplace else. Now, where that someplace else is, I know not, or at least didn't when I did this map. But I found out. Okay, so let's look at the next one. Here we go. Okay, so where did they come from? Where did they actually originate? So this was, a session done on the origination of these beings, these people, where they came from. Now, I might have gotten that they came from Mount Shasta. I might have gotten that they came from a different dimension, a different universe even. All of these kinds of things I've gotten in other sessions on different kinds of beings or situations or places or people, what have you. But what did I get when I looked at this? Again, completely blind, could have been looking at anything. I got another planet. So you could call these beings extraterrestrial. You could also call them terrestrial, and we'll get to that. You can't see it on here because the photo cut out, but it says new perspective. Now, when I'm mapping, if you watch my live maps, you'll see when I change a map, I like to also change my perspective. Not all the time, but most of the time. And I'll write new perspective. I'll do what's called an ideogram, which is just kind of a squiggle that helps me orient myself and gives me a piece of data about what's happening here. And I'm off and running. So here we go. This was a planet, and it is now desolate and deserted. And it has these ancient, we're talking hundreds of millions of years old, maybe billions of years old, minimum of 500 million years, I'd say. A really long time ago, this was a living place, but it has been dead for a very long time. I got that it was far away, cold, vacant. It was empty, but was once full. And this right here is the actual planet. And then the rest of it is an illustration of what's on and under the planet. But this was the planet. I drew this first. I wrote planet in space, and I drew this planet. I said cloudy, dust layers, multicolored, you can't see through it. Honestly, at that point, I was starting to think I was looking at Jupiter, but this was a solid planet. It wasn't a big gas planet, and it just felt really different than when I look at other things in our solar system. So I started to figure out this is not any place around here. And I drew this little X here and said located here, and then I drew the rest of this map, the bottom part of this map. This is the ground layer, okay? This is the ground layer. And under the ground is this big complex. Now, this is just one very small part of this planet. There are so many more fascinating things on this planet that we won't be able to get to in this presentation, but will be in the book. So here is this strange kind of structure. It's gold in color, and it felt like it was gold. I think it might have been gold. And it was absolutely huge, like so big you can't even imagine how big this was. And there were all of these. You recognize these from the last session? It's those pods. The same exact pods. I said this was like a factory. Echoes of the past. They transport out These pods transport out, but never in. So this is a one-way shoot out to maybe up to the ship, or who knows, right? That they're empty. They're all empty, empty. These had, I don't know if they ever had living things in them, but they certainly don't today. Now, there are this really cool, interesting structure. It's like an ancient stone complex, like old ancient ruins. And it kind of, looks like maybe you'd expect an old wall or a big, huge boundary of some sort. But even though it had this irregularity to the stones themselves, it also felt very deliberate in some way, that every stone was exactly, precisely engineered to look exactly the way that it did. Even though it had an irregularity, to my eyes, I felt that wasn't exactly what was going on here. And there's no life at all. Now, so I started to probe, pressing I rub my map to probe it. Sometimes I use my pen. And I wanted to find out why. What happened? Why is everything empty and gone and dead? And here's this thing. It was, it wasn't a sun. It was not a sun. This was not a supernova or some kind of huge solar event. This is not a sun. It was something else. It was a huge, enormous energy in the past, long, long ago. It felt something like nuclear, but it wasn't nuclear. It was something more powerful. I've looked at a lot of nukes out there, hydrogen bombs, all conventional human weaponry. Been there, done that. This was something so much more powerful and so different than that. And there were waves of destruction. It was devastating. And in quotes here, knew it was coming. So they knew this was going to happen. And I also said this was not natural. So this was a weapon, some kind of a weapon, or it could be some kind of science experiment or technology they use where something horrible went wrong and it turned into a weapon. So something really bad happened on this planet. The gray dudes are no more on this planet. So now here's a map, and again, a new perspective. So this is page 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in a session. And this was looking at one particular gray dude, a gray dude at random on one of these ships. And so here he is again. Now this one doesn't look so lizard-like, right? But there are the eyes. The eyes, as you can see, they're not the huge wraparound eyes, but they're bigger than ours proportionally. I said this was not human, and no food goes through the mouth. And here's the outfit here. And I said that the outfit, there was an exchange of gases inside and outside the outfit. And this guy, this is like the coolest thing. And this shows up in several sessions, this yellow thing, these yellow rings, carrying a ring shape. And again, no detectable gender like human or earth life. So they may be gendered, but in a way I can't identify because it's beyond my human experience and understanding. So that they're not considered clothes to them, but protection, and it allows this exchange of gases. There were foot coverings, but no toes. These particular gray dudes did not have toes. At least this guy didn't have any toes. It was just a weird pod for a foot. I guess you can never stub your toe if you don't have any. This guy came across as very elegant and quiet. Constant thought in and out, just constant. It was like waves of thought, like the way that we breathe. Their thoughts felt like breath to me. It was more like breath than individual thoughts. Like a pulse, like a heartbeat. That's what it was. And the eyes do not see like humans, more of a data collection and storage device, but it's biological. And the thought, this was really fascinating. The thought in these gray dudes was in all of the body, like every part of them thought, not just limited to their quadcameral brain. It was pulsing and pervasive and expanding. It was just unbelievable. And since then, since this session actually, and this was probably 5 years ago, I did this one, 5 or 6 years ago, I have tried to cultivate that full body thought in myself. And I've been making a little bit of headway, to be honest. I think this is something that we can all do because our seat of intuition, is in our gut, right? It's not even in our head. So I started thinking about things that way and about how I could use the information coming up through my calves or my thighs, up through my guts and into my chest and heart and out through my fingertips. And every now and then, for a split second, I feel like I'm connected in that way. Maybe it's something that's latent in us or that we have the potential to become. I'm a long way from it, but I'm working on it. So this was really interesting too. I was probing this guy, this little gray dude, and I felt that the body is a construct. This was like a thought from them. The body is a construct around a sentient being. And that's like us in some way. I even wrote that. I guess that's like us in some way. It's fully integrated, but not the actual form. Rigid, but not solid. Oh, no, that's this here, right here. But the body is a construct was so key to them. And I think that this, they're clearly a telepathic species. And I think that they see the body as useful part of accomplishing things in the physical world. I don't know. It was a very deep thought, even though it sounds simple. So now let's take a look at these rings. This guy was carrying a ring shape, and I focused on the ring shape, and I said that it was rigid, but not solid. It was lit up like a light tube, like a light stick you get at a concert, but there was no outer covering. No outer covering. And this light tube, this light ring, it amplifies and collapses things around it. There was invisible, it's not light frequency. I keep using that word because it's energy of some sort, and that's like what made sense to me. But this thing was like stretching and bending and collapsing. And I wrote down time waves. It was important. Time waves! I wrote in big print. And I've thought a lot about that, and it's something I've been exploring on the side as well, these time waves and what that actually means. So here we go, next one. Down there. Okay, so let's take a look at how they got here. Their planet was dying. Did they send ships out, or were there already ships out over here, or what happened? So here we go. This is the beginning of a session because you can see there's my sigil and my ideogram. So there were many thousands upon thousands of beings, ancient travelers. I wrote pre-dinosaur, coasting, cold outside, ship huge, waiting. They're going this way. Beings, there's 100,000 or more. They're all in this part of the ship, what I'd call the front of the ship, had this nose cone. Almost like an airplane. 10,000. Then here's an interior corridor. And this was where the energy source for the ship was. Energy source, it was like a pinpoint. It expanded and contracted. I asked, nuclear? No. It's a novel source I can't identify. So this is some kind of technology that needs to be explored using different techniques in transdimensional mapping. So that's for another project that I am working on. Here's another interior corridor. And then these were all the supplies. Of course, I drew them as boxes, but I wrote not in boxes. But the boxes illustrate that it's a supply room. I wrote quiet, waiting game, escape. And this is how they got to Earth. So here's the ship, and you see all the little yellow circles on the map. Those are those light tubes, the time wave devices. And there's a whole bunch of them somehow encased in the ship, but they expand and contract. And so they're pulling from the future, pulling the past into the future. That's what those light rings were doing. It was a wave, not space, not light, but time, a time wave. What takes eons, but you don't know it. Time is movement, it is change, it is not fixed. Oh, those light rings. I know those people. That's when I knew what I was looking at when I got the light rings, right? And then this is what the ship would do, and these light rings caused it. There was a zap, and the ship would enlarge, right? And when the ship enlarged, look at this, the nose cone got pointier, and the ship became bigger, enormous, and the nose got pointy, and then zap, and back down, smaller, but still huge. And then here's Earth, but look, it looks different. The continents look different. Plate tectonics, I wrote. And it's a structure elongated, full of life, like a rescue boat, like the Titanic. Why is it like the Titanic? Many sent out to escape, different direction, alone. And they said, oh, it's not the Titanic. Cold, wandering, waiting. So here they are. This is the progression. Small to huge to small, zapping in between. This is the time waves moving this ship along on its journey. Yeah, so let's see what's next. Okay, this is the landing spot. So here's our ancient pre-dinosaur planet. 300 to 400 million years ago, I wrote. This was a new perspective. I remember this session because I was like, I don't know, I think this was like page 8 or 9, map 8 or 9. By then I was like really into this, and so I was getting pretty clear data. Landform spherical, large planet Earth, yes. Here it is, but it's ancient from a long time ago. Boom! That's where they landed, right here. And that's the relative size of this thing. Now, if you look, that's bigger than many, many countries. Maybe that's not as big as Australia or Greenland, but that's huge, right? This is huge. The ship was that big. This was the relative size compared to the planet. And that was like in my noggin, really important to say. And it was giving off signals. This was a crash landing. This was not a gentle glide in. This was essentially a crash style landing where they didn't have all of their navigation, or there was something wrong with the ship. And so it was a huge disruption to the planet and to themselves. And they were sending out signals, distress signals, or some kind of signals of some sort. Now, these are also telepathic beings. So they were also using their minds to communicate. But whatever they were trying to communicate with, they couldn't reach. The signals lasted a long time, but they died out. None received in return. They were alone, cold and alone. It is alone. A remnant of what was. X marks the spot. One and done. And further sessions, all this work I did, they sent out a number of these ships before the energy weapon or the technology went sour, whatever happened over on that planet. And this was the only ship that made it, and it landed here. And here we are, millions upon millions of years later, right? Splash was not an elegant landing. Something went wrong. They lost the ability to correct path. Everything changed because of this. This was not their original, this was not where they were intending to go at all. They were meant to go somewhere else, but this just happened to land here. The crash itself, as far as the planet goes, was disruptive. It caused tidal waves. They survived, but some died. Remains hidden. Oh, this remains hidden. Yeah, the ship, it's still there. It remains hidden, but some people know where it is, I wrote. Some know where. What happened next? Waiting for a long, long time. Stasis, self-repair, reboot, signals. Still there, but has moved due to planetary changes. So, poor little gray dudes. Let's see where we are. That's the first one there. Oops, there we go. Okay, so this is pretty interesting. So, they've been on this planet. They've been on this planet for a long, long, long time. It will take a long, long, long time to rebuild, and there's no help coming. They had to build up before because they knew something was coming. They knew on their old planet, they knew something was coming. And on this new planet, their new home, Earth, they knew something was coming. What was coming? It was the thing that wiped out the dinosaurs, whether that was a comet or a meteor or a moon or another ship. I mean, there's all these conspiracy theories out there, but I think all scientists would agree that we had a catastrophic Earth event at that time, which wiped out the dinosaurs. So they had to figure out what to do because they knew something was coming. They knew this was going to happen. And this was the first time in their entire civilization that they didn't have consensus. Consensus is a hallmark of these particular people. They're, because of those constant thoughts in and out, they're always in a homeostatic state. You know, they know everything, love everything. They do love. They have this sense of love. It feels very different than ours, but it's love to them. And they know whatever, they know everything about each other and about the status of any individual in the collective. But all of a sudden, things started breaking apart for them. And I think because that prior event was so traumatic on their home planet, to have to go through it again, I think was just too mind bending, even for an advanced species, right? So what do we do? It was complicated. They were very logical about it. There was some stray emotion. They have very different emotional makeup than we do. We wouldn't even recognize most of their emotions as emotions, which is why I think many people feel that they don't have emotions. That's the anthropomorphic stuff coming in there. They do. They do. They just are not at all like ours. This really feels different. Anyway, and they had a conflict. And it was anger filled, but it wasn't like human emotion. It was a crisis point for them. They were not happy with each other. They made pros and cons. There was no consensus. It was the only non-consensus ever. It almost was like a mutiny. A lack of connection to the outside was the cause, and they had to figure out a new path forward. But they couldn't figure out what to do, so they didn't do anything. It was just so chaotic that indecision ruled the day. And incoming, boom, the end of the dinosaurs, right? Do we stop it? They did not. It was a societal break. Everything changed here. Boom. Dinosaur event, I asked, and I wrote yes. So let's see what happens next. Oops. Oh yeah. So here they are. Now we're talking eons later, absolute eons later. The ship, this was a new map, new perspective on the structure, on the ship itself. And it's way under the water, very deep below the surface. It had completely sunk down. Big, huge, heavy thing in this tumultuous ocean that had just been rocked by the dinosaur catastrophic event. And here's the big ship. And then I drew the ship and I wrote, I know these people. You start to recognize your friends when you do this. Here's the beginning of the ship, and here's more signals. They had newly established signal, new thoughts, new ideas, and they decided, let's go with what we have. So they started to rebuild their society. There were people inside the ship working. The interior was completely reconfigured. You know, we don't have those same corridors and everything. And there was all this rebuilding going underway. And you know what they created? They couldn't take this huge ship up out of the water. It was just stuck down there. It was really stuck. I think they probably could today, but at that point they couldn't. So they wanted to explore around. So they had to make something where they could go out and do it. So what did they build? They build little flying saucers, the first flying saucers. Here on the planet, maybe anywhere. Maybe this is the first ones of all time. Who knows? Rebuilding underway. They sent these out. They made an opening here, which they didn't have before. They sent out 3 at first, but then more were built. They also built 2 structures on the floor of the ocean, on the ocean floor. It was a habitat for safety, and they kind of moved their control center down here. And so they've got a control centers in these things. That's where they're managing their operations. And they created new vehicles, structures, small ones for short travel, but they couldn't go too far. So these first ships, though they could bop around the planet pretty well, they weren't capable of interstellar flight or anything like that. They were just mostly used as survey survey ships to figure out what was on the surface of the planet, what maybe they could collect and use from here. They needed resources desperately. So let's see what they did next. Here we go. So, new perspective, the structure on the land. Because in a prior map, I was looking, I think, at when they first sent out the mini ships. And so here we are looking at the mini ship on the land. Here's the land, here's the water. It said it's moving, it's hovering. Ship circular beings watching, monitoring, planning, new life experimenting. And they wrote, this is home now. This is home now. Structure in motion, stops in motion again, beings inside, on surface from below the water, tinkering, changing, new life from old, eons pass, a long process, attempt to achieve harmony. Nothing was left untouched. Here's some plants, microbes, large scale. They were manipulating the life on this planet, the plant life, because they needed to be able to have nutrients that they could assimilate. They don't eat through their body, but they have other ways of taking in nutrient through their mouth, but they can still get nutrients, and they needed to replenish everything from their civilization so that they could survive. So they started genetically manipulating things on our planet. Okay? Their thoughts were singular, survival. This is their new Earth. I mean, Earth, that's an anthropomorphic term because I don't know, like literally the name of their old planet, but it's their new Earth, right? And it's an echo through time. What was will be something new and improved. Using tools, manipulation, DNA, genetic survey, manipulation, progression. This is our home. There were little animals on the surface now, so we're moving along in time. The dinosaurs are gone. Now there's the mammals start to appear. And this session was a watershed moment for me because I started seeing these people as not being alien or extraterrestrial, started seeing them more on an equal footing to us because this was their home from then, from way back then, from before anything that we evolved from. They've been here much longer than we have. In many ways, it's their planet as much as it is ours. And even though they're immigrants here, right? They're immigrants for sure, but they started to make the planet their own. And that was a real mind bender for me to start thinking about, wow, we're kind of the aliens, aren't we? We came much later, and we're walking around in a world that they manipulated. It's a little freaky to think about, and it's very sobering. I sound like Lou Elizondo there. Okay. Okay, this one's just interesting. This was a sideline. This wasn't part of this project, but I'm just going to show it because it's really funny and interesting. So we are looking at the creation of some megalithic structure in ancient Sumerian times, right? And the Sumerians have this story about the Anunnaki who came from the sky. And there are many UFO researchers today believe that the Anunnaki was some kind of a visitor race of some sort that was reported in these ancient times that looks very different to the gray dudes or to other kinds of dudes out there, reptilian dudes or Pleiadian dudes. But the Anunnaki are very tall, right? Here they are. And they have really beautiful ornate clothing. And they wear these funny headdresses, and they carry these little doodads that are really kind of weapons. And and I was looking at the construction of a particular megalithic site, right? And what do I get? I get the Anunnaki kind of enslaving these humans, but also teaching these humans, but enslaving them to help create this. And these are the Anunnaki ships. They're these hexagonal shaped ships. They were orange. At least that's how they came out in this session. And that honestly could be a symbol of or a metaphor for how it's not a flying saucer. It's a geometrically shaped ship without soft curves. Or they might just be hexagonal. So all the little people are saying, look up. A society of people. This guy is teaching, pushing these royalties, tall, he's overbearing. Visits for a while, but plans to return. Got what they wanted. These are laborers, building, working, ancient. And I said, pyramids? No, it wasn't the pyramids. They were scared and tired and overworked. They were learning new trades, farm working, construction. Human society explodes with new ways of being. So even though this session was about a megalithic structure and then, wow, the Anunnaki appear and poor enslaved humans, you know what else appeared? Our gray dudes appeared. They were watching all this happening. So that's why I'm throwing this into this presentation, because you get this weird stuff out of the blue. They were watching, but they didn't interact. There's no relationship between the gray dudes and the Anunnaki style beings. They were surprised, but not surprised. They had never met them before, but they watched. They didn't do anything. They just let it happen. They just let it happen. There you go. The more you know. Okay, so let's take a look at just a little abduction scenario session. Now this one's doesn't look as colorful as my normal maps. I did this one while I was traveling, and it's just done with regular pen on paper because I didn't have all my art supplies with me. So you can do this with a finger in the sand. You can do this with finger paints. You can do this with whatever art supplies you have. Now, I love using a lot of color and texture. I believe that the colors and textures that you choose while you're mapping are actually pieces of data, and they reveal something about the experience. But when you only have a black pen, that's what you go with. So here we go. And this was a classic abduction account, a famous abduction account that's been written. I think it might have been in one of John Mack's books or David Jacobs' books or something. It was a classic case. And so here's the woman that's been abducted, and she's been placed on this sterile environment in this table, and a human female, suspended animation, not awake but not asleep. So she was in the suspended animation, and there was this really strange piece of equipment. It had like these weird, almost like jaw-like things and lights at the top. It was metallic, and underneath it, it was like measuring her consciousness field. So these beings inside the ship were measuring her consciousness. And there was soft light around from no visible source. It was a circular enclosure. And I had this like almost a conversation with one of the gray dudes. They were very aware of me. They often are when you map or remote view them, extremely telepathic species, and there is no such thing as time. And so, or time isn't as we understand it. So you can interact with them at any point in time. But so I was getting almost like messages, but it was more like they were revealing something to me, not telling me something, but just showing me something about themselves and about this scenario. And I got, like, they were saying that every part of her understands and knows we are her family. They slowly wake up over time, meaning we're slowly waking up over time. This is a gift of life, awareness, oneness. The way we survive is through them, not an army, a family. So they were trying to relay that they're trying to survive, and we are a conduit for that survival. But they don't see themselves as being an invaded army. They see all of us as this family, this earth-based family. Now, remember again, they've been here for 400 million years. Humans have been around for 200,000. We're just a teeny tiny baby little drop, and they've been here for so much longer. So this makes sense in that framework. A thought like this makes sense. And when, this one gray dude, in considering this woman, this young woman, this one gray dude, this is what he was relaying to me. This is a member of our collective. In other words, this woman is a member of their collective. This is a human woman, mind you, but this gray dude's perspective was that that woman was part of their collective too, as is every single one of us. They do not understand. We gave them everything. It's complicated. And there was this sense of something like love, but emotions do not match and are not expressed on the same level, being to being. So there was this kind of deep sense of love. So I think I've talked your ears off enough on the secret history of the Grey ETs, but it's just a little peek into what's possible with transdimensional mapping, how you can start to figure out all these small pieces and see how they fit together. Now, there may be many things in the maps I shared today that I will come to understand in a different way as time goes by. That's natural, because you can't help but see things through your own perspective and through your own sense of understanding. You can't help but only understand things that you've been exposed to or read about or thought about. And I may understand more about all these things as time goes by. And again, I am working on a book about all of this, and I'll share every single map and task in that book. But thank you for watching, and I hope you have a beautiful day.